I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff, your pre-Left Behind podcast host.
And I'm Matt Bernica, and I'm here to sell you a big container of freeze-dried soup that you can rehydrate in the end times. It's very cheap.
Does that make Jim Baker a post-tribulationist rapture guy?
Does it? I think so.
I don't know anything about his theology, but I guess that's my guess. That you got to prepare for the tribulation. You have to ride it out.
Right. I guess it means that he doesn't believe in the rapture, right? Because if he did, then all the Christians would be gone, right?
Well, this is the thing, though. The rapture can happen before the tribulation or after the tribulation, depending on what shitty Bible theory you actually have.
Right. Huh. Well, there's only one way to get to the bottom of this one, and that is to talk about another classic Christian movie, Left Behind.
Ooh, still on that spooky October theme.
That's right. It's still Spookstober, and we're gonna do another spooky Christian movie. We did Thief in the Night last week, and it was really fun and cool and very triggering for me specifically. But this week we're gonna move on to Kirk Cameron's Left Behind, but we're actually gonna take a look at Left Behind 2: Tribulation Force. We figured, we already know what happens. The rapture, we get it. People disappear. Who cares? But what happens afterward is kind of the interesting thing for us. So last week we talked about the rapture. This week we're going to talk about the tribulation. And if you have no idea what it is I'm talking about, rapture is when the rapture is an evangelical end times theory where God takes all of the Christians to heaven and leaves everyone else left behind. The tribulation is like all of the bad stuff that happens to people who are left on earth. And it's about the rise of the Antichrist and a one world government and a whole bunch of other spooky stuff. So you got all that to look forward to. It's gonna be a great one here. So we did watch Left Behind 2: Tribulation Force. So if you haven't ever seen that movie, you don't need to. We're gonna summarize it in a little bit. But before we even get to it, Dean, can you help me answer some of these questions from Reddit about the tribulation?
I think so. Yep. I've been studying my my special study Bible with all my charts and all my graphs, and I think I can do it.
I really appreciate that because I was cruising through Reddit earlier today, and I did come across a question on Reddit on /r/Christianity, and it did pose a pretty troubling question to me. The question is, are you prepared for real tribulation? And I thought to myself, no, I'm not, and I don't know how to be. So here's the question, Dean. Mm-hmm. Imagine Christians Sorry, there's lots of grammatical errors. Imagine Christians being put into asylums as insane. Imagine it being illegal to even have a Bible. If you think it's bad now, that Christians are being set aside now, just wait until the real tribulation happens. So, Dean, are you prepared for the real tribulation, and what are you going to do to become prepared?
I am prepared. I'm going to take those Christians right to the asylum. I am prepared.
You're going to put them all in there, huh?
That's right. I'm going to make it illegal for them to have a Bible.
Okay. That wasn't really the answer I was expecting you to give me. But you're going to just be the guy. You're prepared to do it.
I mean, it just depends. Christians like this guy? Probably.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad.
Other people can have the Bible. That would be legal. This guy, though, no access. Too dangerous.
It's too dangerous. We have to do a background check for some of these folks.
Some people can operate heavy machinery. Some people can't. It's just a question of discernment.
Right. Great. Check. We got that one done. Here's a second question that I do need a little bit more elucidation on here. So this one is called Socialism and the Great Tribulation.
Oh, wow.
Where in end times prophecy is there any indication that the New World Order during the Great Tribulation will be communist or socialist? Does not the tongue-in-cheek lament over the collapsing realm of the Antichrist in chapter 18 of Revelation describe it as being capitalist? So, Dean, in this Great Tribulation that we're coming towards after the rapture, after everyone else gets taken away, but definitely not us because we're not those types of Christians. Is the Antichrist going to be doing socialism here for us or not?
I'm gotta say no. Any Antichrist of mine wouldn't be doing any kind of socialism because we know that Jesus is a socialist. So just a big bad capitalist. I think that Antichrist probably just going to be preaching the good news of free market solutions to one world government, just the ultimate neoliberal state controlling everybody. Why have all these tiny nation states when you could just have a big one?
One big UN-led planetary order, as these movies would have us believe.
That's right, with the free market. Although, as we'll find out, in Tribulation Force, I was extremely interested in the idea of consolidating all world currencies into one currency, but actually apparently not caring about markets. So I think in universe, it actually is capitalist still.
Yeah, I think so.
As Frederick Jameson says, not only is it easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism, but it is easier to imagine the rapture of just a small percentage of Christians than it is to imagine the end of capitalism.
That's right, man. Well, we can talk more. I mean, there's so much anti-communism actually bound up in like in this whole dispensationalism thing, but I think that's right. I think that this movie in Left Behind, Tribulation Force, the Antichrist is a capitalist. So what are you gonna do about it?
I've got one for you that I found.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm ready for it.
All right, this is more of a technical question, and the question goes like this: if the rapture was to occur, would pregnant women lose their baby, and would any people be able to be born after the rapture?
Well, that first part of the question is extremely troubling. I don't like that. Okay, I mean, listen, I'm a Christian socialist. I've never read the Bible for real, so I don't actually know. But in Left Behind, children all do disappear because they aren't old enough to be able to have made a decision about accepting Jesus Christ in their heart. So
that's right.
Based on that gospel, in that biblical story, I would say that babies of all ages are going to be gone. People who can't have made a decision, they're done. They're gone. They've been raptured. Boom.
What a day.
Yeah, what a day. But can babies be born is a real interesting question. Yeah, I think so. I think they can. For no reason, I think that. I don't think that the rapture suspends human biology, but I don't know. Hard to say.
I feel like probably they have the baby and then it just gets beamed up.
God sees that baby down there being formed, and it's like, oh, nope, you're not supposed to be down there.
Yoink. It leaves behind less clothes, so that's convenient.
That is convenient. Well, this week and last week, we've been doing a lot of dunking on these films, on these Christian films. And as we were getting ready for this episode, I started feeling a little bit bad. And I thought to myself, well, I mean, it's really easy to make fun of somebody else's art. But could I make my own art? Could I make my own rapture movie that's just as good? And I put together a little bit of a pitch, Dean, and I hope that like maybe in this episode, before we get too far into the movie analysis, I could kind of pitch you what I think would be a good Left Behind movie, and we can kind of workshop it together. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. I appreciate this commitment to really trying to put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, right? We're spending all this time to taking these movies apart and telling you how bad they are and how silly they are and how just like buck wild these folks are. I think that like I have to prove I'm better than them, that I can make a movie that's better.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. This is a new segment on the Magnificast where I'm going to pitch a movie to Dean that we're only going to do this one time ever. So get ready for it. So I've worked on this considerably, by which I mean I've written 3 paragraphs. So this is Left Behind in the 2000s iterations of these movies. There are 3 of them. This is sort of like a 2019 reboot, but it's maybe like a Netflix original. It's probably who I'd pitch it to first, at least.
Mm-hmm.
I think what it's going to do is it's going to sort of it's going to correct a lot of the really boring things about these movies, because these movies are extremely boring. So
Holy
Left
cow.
Behind, as you all are about to find out, and maybe you already know, right? It's an apocalyptic thriller that gives like a really dramatized story about Jesus' second coming, or his rapture, I guess, before the second coming. It's great. It's fantastic. But it is kind of like convoluted as a story. There's a lot of stuff going on with like Israel and the UN. And while this is like really great for conspiracy dads like myself, it's not great for teens. I can't imagine this movie like keeping a teen's attention for more than 30 seconds. Israel, where's that? I don't think so. Teens don't know where Israel is historically. So I think it makes sense to do like another Left Behind movie, but this time it's specifically for teens. So this movie is called Left Behind Teen Edition. Just like you have like a Bible that's Teen Edition, this is like the Left Behind Teen Edition.
So there were Left Behind teen books.
Dean, I need you to play with me in this space. No, there are not.
Yeah, I'm
Left
ready.
Behind teen books.
No, I'm ready. But the thing is, I only know that because today Emily told me that, because I asked her. She watched this movie with me for bizarre reasons I still don't understand. And she said that I asked if she had ever read them when she was younger, and she said no, she had only ever read the teen ones. So
dang,
they're out there.
Well, I accidentally invented something that exists already, but I gotta tell you, this is gonna be a lot better.
Yeah, of course. No, it is not to detract from your efforts. It's really only to say that you're making an authentic reboot here.
No, thank you. Okay, great. Well, okay, so Left Behind Teen Edition, it takes place, I think, probably like these books do, in the same Left Behind cinematic universe as the Kirk Cameron films, because so there's continuity there. So you'll see some characters kind of make reappearances. It's great. The adults are going to love the tie-in. But this one is going to focus in on what the post-rapture, like tribulation time was like for teens specifically. Okay, so here we go. Here's the start of my official pitch. That's just the lead up, the preamble. So the world's in chaos. There's looting, rioting, and tons of teens fornicating and vaping. You better believe it. But one teen, Chet Crunkswell, has had enough of all this sinning. And after getting his life turned around at the church with Pastor Bruce Barnes, who's a character in the film, he spends all of his time trying to witness to his fellow teens. But there's just one problem. He's a huge hunk, and every person that he tries to tell about Jesus falls in love with his dreamy eyes and chiseled jaw. It's a problem. So Chet Crunkswell, full of angst and guilt for not being able to save any souls, hits a dark point in his life. You can imagine this as sort of like a montage in the movie. That's like he's like skateboarding and he's smoking a cigarette. And after pulling off like a really sick pop shove it off a curb, he does lose his footing and he smashes his face into the pavement. When Chet wakes up, Chloe Steele is standing over him in the church's makeshift hospital. She unwraps the bandages from his face, and he's at least 5% less of a hunk than he was before. His now moderate unattractiveness helps others see him as just a regular guy who wants to share the love of God with them. Chet's relative unattractiveness helps him go on to build a sizable youth group. The film closes with Chet leading a devotional in the church basement. He's clearly evolved into the church's youth pastor. The final scene is him standing on a small platform holding a pair of devil sticks. He does an incredible devil stick stunt and says, "These 3 sticks are pretty amazing, right? Well, let me tell you about another 3 things that are amazing. The Trinity." There's a close-up on Chet's face. He smiles. Cut to black. Left Behind, Teen Edition. So, Dean, what do you think? I think it's pretty perfect as it is, but I am willing to accept some criticism on this one.
Well, I'm just thinking here, there's certainly a tonal shift, it seems to me, between the teen edition and the adult edition of Left Behind. Decidedly a narrative of a lot of fun and excitement. I can see where you're going with that. Yeah, ending on the devil sticks note. It's a much kind of lighter fare than what we get in Left Behind Adult Edition. I do have some concerns about the opening. The fornicating and vaping. If we're looking for a PG-13 rating here, I think we're already going to be losing our main constituency. So we'll just have to find a way.
Yeah, we could do that tastefully
Yeah.
for youth groups.
Or all off screen. We could just have some shots, some reaction shots of Chet just surveying. So you never actually see what happens, but you just see Chet's horror at the scenes in front of him. I think that would be a really interesting, unique way of doing cinema, adding something new to the genre.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I should probably also mention too that Chet Crunkswell is loosely based on me in my life.
Yeah. I could tell when you got to the devil sticks part. I knew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, this is cool because it's just kind of like building out that universe. It lets you, it lets the Left Behind universe breathe a little bit. You get to learn about like what's going on at the church while Buck and Ray are out fighting the Antichrist and doing their whole thing. And at the very end of Left Behind 2 Tribulation Force, there are a lot of people in that church, and you got to imagine in that back pew there's a big youth group sitting there, and that's Chet, and it's all his doing. So it just like really, I think, establishes a little bit more depth to this world that Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins has made for us.
Yeah. I'd also like to imagine Chet as of the exact age of where he was just too old to get raptured.
Right, like he went to church camp and he was like, "Puh, lame."
Yeah.
And then he did do devil sticks outside instead.
I mean, they're called devil sticks for a reason.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's good. Let's send it off. We got to send it to a producer.
Okay, let me just. All right, and send. I sent to Netflix
Perfect.
right now.
I think we've got a hit on our hands.
We're gonna make a lot of money.
Here's the thing about Left Behind. If you don't know what it is, you're doing great. You might as well just turn off this podcast because we're about to add a real wrench in everything you think about Christianity in the world. If you do know what Left Behind is, well, then also I guess we should do a preemptive apology for making you sit through us talking about it because it really is just awful. So last week we talked about A Thief in the Night, which is kind of like the pre-Left Behind. It creates all the tropes that kind of get taken up in Left Behind, but not in the same way. We can talk more about that in a little bit. But it comes out of, we didn't talk about this at all last week, probably we should have, but these movies come out of an extremely specific kind of evangelicalism or fundamentalism that is commonly called dispensationalism. And if you don't know what that is, it's just a fancy word for a particular way of reading the Bible through an extremely specific interpretive lens that creates a story about what happens in the end times. And like I kind of alluded to earlier, there are some debates within dispensationalism about exactly what events happen and when and all that kind of thing. But the high points are, Jesus came, did his whole thing. Told us we got to accept him, etc. And we've had, a couple thousand years to do it. And you've got to have a personal relationship with Jesus if you want to go to heaven. And then at some point, we know that Jesus is going to come back. But all these things happen before that. So one of them is this event called the Rapture, where Christians get beamed up to heaven. And all the other people who are not Christians stay on earth. That event, like I said also earlier, can happen before another period of time that's commonly called the Tribulation. Dispensationalists say it's like 7 years where the earth gets judged and there's all kinds of spooky and bad things that happen, and the Antichrist comes around and controls the world. There's a beast in there. There's all kinds of wild stuff happening. And then at the end of the tribulation, either the rapture happens there if it didn't already happen, and then, people get sorted out, or at the end of the tribulation, then there's kind of like almost like a second rapture, or the people who became Christians during the rapture, they get spared the final judgment, and then Jesus comes back.
Yeah, Jesus comes back, and there's the final battle.
Right.
That's the last book in the Left Behind series where Jesus does have a big sword and he does kill the devil.
Yeah, that's right. So. Very important.
something to look forward to.
Yeah, the devil and lots of people, apparently. So that's the theology. But this week, Matt suggested we should do Left Behind, which was a great suggestion. I told him I refuse to watch the first Left Behind, only because I've already seen A Thief in the Night. I already know what happens in the Rapture, but I would watch the sequel. Matt, being the overachiever that he is, though, did watch both films. And Matt, I gotta say, watching just the sequel, I did lose a little bit of the plot. So maybe you could just ease us into the conversation here. What's kind of bringing us into the world of Left Behind 2, Tribulation Force?
You think you're losing the plot, but you're not. There's not a lot of plot to begin
All right,
with.
good.
It's pretty complicated. Well, I'm sorry, it's pretty uncomplicated, really. So, okay, Left Behind, like you said, it's like an evangelical film about the apocalypse. I think it's actually, it's more helpful to think about it. Like, okay, if A Thief in the Night is a horror movie, like it's shot like a horror movie, because it is, Left Behind is not that,
right?
Though it's like it's a disaster movie. Think of like, I don't know, like 2012 or whatever. Other disaster movies that you might have seen. There's a bazillion of them. But it's like that kind of movie. A big bad event happens, and this is sort of like the aftermath of that event. So that's the kind of that's how they think of the rapture and sort of the end times, not as horror but as disaster. It's kind of an interesting and important bit that we'll come back to later in the conversation. But Left Behind is a series of books that's written by these two really eclectic and I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, eclectic and yet strange evangelical Christians named Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. They're both like these like very specific type of like fundamentalist or evangelical kind of people. Basically the whole point of the book is to sort of speculate kind of like realistically about what this would be like, and they kind of put it in a more contemporary setting, and they give us like all of these the trappings of disaster, and kind of help us think about what it would look like to maybe convict us of it. But like what's so weird is that it is extremely complicated, and to be convicted of it you have to understand it, and to understand it is like playing 12-dimensional chess with yourself or something. So this movie is trying to make it more appealing or sensical to people, but it doesn't. The film Left Behind, the first one, it was made in 2001, and it stars Kirk Cameron, who you might recognize from Growing Pains, or if you grew up evangelical like me, you might know him from Bible Man. But Kirk Cameron, or Fireproof or something, right? If you're born later than me, he's the evangelical actor before Kevin Sorbo.
Oh man, here's a great. Sorry, just to get us into the Kirk Cameron mythos. Emily was also telling me that so Emily has a huge interest in evangelicalism because she was like kind of in and kind of out of it, and she watches the show about this family called the Duggars. It's like 16 kids accounting, or 17 or 18. I mean, they keep counting, so I'm not sure.
They're a quiverful family.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And they're like fundamentalist types. But Emily's telling me there's this episode where they go to so they like don't watch movies, but they do watch some of them, and they go to this like Christian movie festival. And they meet Kirk Cameron there, and this is like after Fireproof, and she was saying that at the end of Fireproof, I guess, so if you don't know what Fireproof is, it's just like a romantic movie, Christian movie. He kisses this, his wife in the film, which was a big scandal because, his wife in the film is not played by his wife in real life. So he told the Duggars that in fact in the film they brought on his actual wife to play the part of his his on-screen wife, and so he was kissing in fact his real life wife on screen, that allowed the Duggars to just really get down and be like, yeah, this is the best movie I've ever seen.
That is amazing. I don't know why Emily is not doing this.
Yeah, I agree. That's true. It was a big mistake. She's asleep right now, or I would just get her on, but maybe next time.
Too bad. Yeah, maybe next time. Well, Left Behind. Okay, so anyways, Kirk Cameron, a wild figure in himself.
Yeah.
But Left Behind, again, it's like the same story as A Thief in the Night, but instead of being set in the 70s and being a horror film, it's set in 2001. It's a disaster film. And also, like, rather than just being about like an individual sort of making their way through the end times, like A Thief in the Night was, it focuses more on, it focuses on like on a small group, a tribulation force, if you will, because that's what they call the movie. It's weird. But also, it's like it really focuses in on like the Antichrist and sort of like the global politics of like how he's going to use the UN to like bring about world peace, which is also a theme in A Thief in the Night. But in this movie, it's like center stage. Like that's like the whole sort of conflict. So these films draw on like lots of latent themes in evangelical politics, like definitely Zionism, definitely supersessionism, definitely lots of weird racism, and mashed up with like the biblical speculations of Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. So because of that, the film's plot focuses a ton on modern day Israel and its particular geopolitical situation. It's smashing together the Israelites of the Bible and Israel as a modern nation state, which is something that you shouldn't do. Anyways, here's the Wikipedia summary for Left Behind. It's really short and to the point, whereas the other one's longer. But this gives you kind of an idea of the sort of flavor of the story, like you would need anyway. Left Behind tells the story of the end times set in the contemporary era, in which true believers in Christ have been raptured, leaving the world shattered and chaotic as people scramble for answers. An obscure Romanian politician named Nicolae Carpathia rises to become Secretary General of the United Nations, promising to restore peace and stability to all nations. What most of the world does not realize is that Carpathia is actually the Antichrist foretold in the Bible. Coming to grips with the truth and becoming born-again Christians, airline pilot Rayford Steele and his daughter Chloe, their pastor Bruce Barnes, and a young journalist named Cameron Buck Williams begin their quest as the Tribulation Force to help save those lost and prepare for the coming tribulation in which God will rain down judgment on the world for 7 years. That's a lot. Can you even believe that someone would write a story and actually name a character Rayford Steele and Buck Williams? It's insane. It is like... It's like an old cowboy was just pulling names out of a hat for this one.
Cameron Buck Williams is very funny. I just love that Buck has no connection to any of the name that he has. It's like it's a nickname, except that it isn't connected to his name.
Yeah. Also, just Rayford Steele is a great
Rayford
name.
Steele's good.
Oh, he's gonna be a man's man, hard as steel.
A pilot.
That's
he
right.
A pilot.
He is. So that's Left Behind. One, that's what happens. It's like I said, it's we've been there, we've done that.
Yeah.
But Dean, tell us about the Tribulation Force, the movie that you
All
watched.
Right, this
and I watched it too, but tell me about it.
Of course. So, Left Behind, Tribulation Force is just a great award-winning film. It did win an award. Hang on, I'll tell you what that award is. Sorry, I just lost my Wikipedia page. Okay, here it is. It was I was wrong. Not award-winning, award-nominated. Left Behind Tribulation Force was nominated for Best Live-Action DVD Premiere Movie by the DVD Premiere Awards. So it's a pretty important film, is what I'm trying to say. It picks up where Matt says the plot just left off. And I'll read a little bit of the wiki summary, maybe interject a bit, because this one is way too long, so I'll try to summarize it. So, it starts a week after the rapture, and the millions of people who vanished into thin air are still missing. Chaos rules the world as panic and grief-stricken survivors continue to search for their lost loved ones. A desperate world looks to the leadership and guidance of UN Secretary Nicolae Carpathia, the only person offering any answers, hope, and plans to restore peace and order. It should be added here that Nicolae Carpathia has just a horrible, horrible Romanian accent.
It's not great.
We can come back to that. While Carpathia has the world's adoration and trust, he's seemingly unaware of a small group of rebels spreading the truth that he is, in fact, the Antichrist. Buck Williams is a highly respected television journalist who has seen firsthand Carpathia's manipulative and deadly powers. You're going to have to fill that in to me, Matt, because they do some flashbacks of him witnessing a scene of horrible violence. What happened in it, they don't tell you. So you do...
Well, so at the end of Left Behind, Nicolae Carpathia, he shoots these two guys who were kind of like plotting against him. They also didn't know he was the Antichrist. And after he shoots them, he uses his devil powers to make everyone believe that they killed one another. And
Gotcha.
They just witnessed this horrible sort of act.
Good. Yeah, right. Gotcha. Okay, that does help a lot. Carpathia's position, Buck Williams' position as a journalist allows him special access to a global audience through the media and to Carpathia himself. Airline pilot, our favorite, Rayford Steele, and his 20-year-old daughter, Chloe, make up the rest of this group. As the Tribulation Force struggles to open the eyes of the world to truth, global events get even stranger when word leaks out that 3 men have mysteriously burned to death at one of the holiest sites in Israel, the Western Wall. At the same time, Rabbi Ben Judah, one of the leading religious scholars of his time, plans to make a world-altering announcement based on years of research. Pastor Barnes believes both events are linked to Carpathia, signaling the oncoming terror of the tribulation. He acts quickly by getting Ray and Buck to embark on a dangerous mission to infiltrate Carpathia's organization. I love Big Brains Pastor Barnes. They must get to Ben Judah before he makes his announcement. Buck is going to the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, to get the witness on tape, but Steve Plank tries to talk him out of it. Bruce wants Rayford to join Carpathia's staff as the pilot of the new plane that the UN government gives to Nikolai. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's a romantic subplot in here. But let me just bring us around. So they end up going to the Western Wall. They meet the 2 witnesses. We'll talk more about them. That's another very important thing for dispensationalists. The witnesses are these like wild, super-powered prophets. Rayford distracts the guards. That's a pretty big deal with the intervention of an angel who like stops time and allows them to slip between some armed guards. Very important. Ben Judah, the rabbi, ends up being convinced by these two witnesses that Jesus is actually the Messiah, and then he ends up actually delivering on TV a speech that says that Jesus is the Messiah, which really gets under Nikolai's skin, grinds his gears, and that is pretty close to the end. Let me think. Is there anything else that I missed, really?
No, I think that's about it. So the world sees Ben Judah's proclamation that Jesus is the Messiah. Ben Judah was supposed to say that Nikolai Carpathia was the Messiah, and it was supposed to be part of this like sort of one world religion that was going to unify people. But it doesn't go as planned. And then at the very end, Carpathia is like screaming at the ceiling of the plane that he's riding in. And he tells God that his time has come to rule the earth and that he needs to get out of the way.
Right.
Meanwhile, back in Chicago at the church, Pastor Bruce is leading worship. And then the whole Tribulation Force gang is there. And they're all singing a big hymn, How Great Thou Art. And Buck enters and they all have hugs and they sing. And that's the end of the movie.
Right.
So that's what happens. They get into the mix of the tribulation. They try to they decide they can't stop the Antichrist. They can't thwart his plan, but they can tell people about Jesus en masse, which is difficult because Nikolai Carpathia, the Antichrist, and the UN are all controlling the media, which is part of that thinly veiled anti-communism of the movie, I think.
Yeah.
But anyways, before we go into any of the themes very deeply here, I do want to read a few reviews from Rotten Tomatoes. So here they are. One user writes, nearly unendurable.
It's true.
Another says, an exceedingly poorly made motion picture. And then finally, a little hard to believe.
I love that. It is.
Not a critical reception.
No.
Yeah, they are all true. That very negative reception of this film is actually kind of a part of the interesting, I guess, story. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. But after these movies were all released, all 3 of them, a bunch of other stuff came with it. Like there's a video game that was made about this movie as well. That we can talk about maybe in a minute too. But in 2008, Tim LaHaye, one of the authors of the book, he brought a lawsuit against the film company, Namesake Entertainment, and they ended up settling out of court. But basically, Tim LaHaye was just pissed that that the movies were so bad. So this is a quote from Tim LaHaye about the movies. My dream has always been to enter the movie theater with a first-class, high-quality movie that is grippingly interesting, but also is true to the biblical storyline. But that was diluted in this first attempt. But Lord willing, we are going to see this thing made into the movie that it should be, and that all the world sees it before the real rapture comes. So based on the sort of result of Tim LaHaye's legal dispute here with Namesake Entertainment and Cloud 10 Pictures, the people who made these movies, was it that Tim LaHaye could get them made again. So Left Behind was then rebooted in 2010 with Nicolas Cage, and that one's on Netflix. So these Left Behinds, the 2001s with Kirk Cameron, those are on Amazon Prime. Nicolas Cage, Left Behind, that's on Netflix. So you gotta get all your your streaming services in line here to get into the cinematic universe.
To tell you the truth, I watched the second one on YouTube.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah,
oh, cool.
free.
Well, it's out there on YouTube. Don't pay for Amazon Prime, that's for sure.
Yeah, this whole thing is wild. The whole story is wild. The story around the films is wild. I should say before we get into this, Matt, did you ever have any background with dispensationalism yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely the background of my evangelical upbringing. I had read, I actually never read the very first Left Behind book because, I mean, again, for the exact same reason we didn't want to watch the movie is like, I already know what happens. Everyone gets raptured. Duh. But I did read the second one because that was supposed to be the exciting one where the Antichrist is like doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I read that one. Yeah, it was just kind of always in the background of like my church experience. It was never like a huge topic of conversation, but I definitely remember talking about it in youth group on more than one occasion. So it was definitely there. Yeah, I don't know. How are you going to be a teen in youth group if you're not going to talk about the rapture?
That's a good question. Because I came to evangelicals a little bit later, I didn't have any of the like childhood scars of it that a lot of people have, thankfully, because my parents were, normal Catholics. But I did get pretty into it in high school, and there's a scene in this film where Kirk Cameron evangelizes to this guy by following a script, asking him like if he thinks that he's a sinner, and the guy of course says no. Right. And then there's this kind of evangelical fantasy about how these conversations go, where Kirk Cameron is like, well, have you ever told a lie? And the guy's like, well, yeah, sure. And he says, well, what does that make you? And the guy says, human. And then Kirk Cameron says, come on, if somebody murders somebody, what do you call that person? And the guy says, a murderer. So Kirk Cameron says, aha, so you're a liar. And then he leads him down the path. And by the end he says, so by your own admission, it sounds to me like you're a sinner. And it's trying to get him self-reflective, and he's got to think about how he's a bad guy and he just needs Jesus Christ. That whole scene is like the way the script of evangelism that I was taught in high school to do and did do at football games and shopping malls and a number of other public places that I don't go to anymore. But all that to say, I didn't get way into the dispensationalism stuff as much, but I had this proximity to it by virtue of, being trained as a very bizarre teen.
Saying that this is like an evangelical fantasy, I think it's exactly the right way to say it, because just like you said, I mean, those types of scripts like obviously don't work in real life because people aren't stupid. People aren't actually dumb, and they won't just let you lead them on this like weird path of like being declared a liar and murderer for like no reason. But this is definitely a fantasy because like all of a sudden these weird evangelical scripts are working and they're finally going to feel vindicated, right? It's going to like evangelical audiences will see this movie and be like, yeah, good point. I'm going to say that to somebody next time. It's going to work, and it won't, but it's going to feel good for that minute.
The tragedy is when every once in a while it does work. I remember listening to this radio show called Way of the Master Radio.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Hosted by Todd Friel, but Kirk Cameron made several appearances as well. He was like their guy in the field, their evangelist in the field that they called up for dispatches of what was going on. And yeah, they would play some very brutal conversations. In retrospect, like at the time, I thought they were great and encouraging, but in retrospect, they were so sad. Anyway, all that to say, yes, this movie, I said to Emily as we were watching it, I feel like you could watch this movie, and just like I said last week with The Thief in the Night, you would know everything that evangelicals think. Like, there's everything in it. There's the script for evangelism is there. There's the script for how to pray the prayer. It's there. There's literal short lessons about biblical theology are in there, from beginning to end. Like, not only is it a dramatization of these events, but it's also trying to make sure that it hits every note of like evangelical strategies for being in the world, which I think is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, totally. And in the in the way of doing that, it also tells you a lot about evangelical politics,
Yeah.
a lot about Zionism, and a lot about what they think about the Jews, and a lot about like the way that they think everyone will end up coming around to Jesus in the end or something like that. It's pretty weird. So maybe we can talk about some of those big themes here for
Yeah.
a minute. So in the tribulation, this is when the Antichrist is in control, right? It's this like 7-year period where the Antichrist, he's going to be in charge. He's going to be doing his thing. God's had all this time to kind of like work on humanity and let them do their thing. And now he's taken the people that chose to accept him into their heart, whatever that means. But this time is for the devil. And what Satan does is, I don't know, pretty weird. It actually is vague and unexplained in a lot of ways. So the devil comes, he's this guy, Nicolae Carpathia. He's like this charismatic Romanian guy. His Romanianness is actually important because there's this like weird speculation from dispensational theology that like the Antichrist will come from the Balkans,
Right.
which is some kind of like weird weird reading of the Bible. Again, like that, it's just like this, hermeneutic that someone made up that is probably unfounded, actually. But anyways, so that's him. And what he does is he like basically like in the first movie, he works his way up to be the Secretary General of the UN, the United Nations. And in this movie, he kind of accepts his role as like the new supreme leader of the entire world. Like everyone loves Nicolae Carpathia. I mean, that's actually really similar to what happened in A Thief in the Night, but but it does play into lots of like sort of fears, like evangelical fears about big government, overreaching organizations. Like there have been right-wing conspiracies around the UN for like a really long time, and they'll flare up from time to time. A few years ago, you might have heard your weird evangelical uncle talking about Agenda 21 that he heard on like a conservative talk radio show or something, like on a Glenn Beck show. But that's like it all kind of comes out of this like UN conspiracy theory sort of thing. So I mean, Agenda 21 is just sort of like one instance of it, but basically it's the idea that like the UN is going to be like seized by some kind of like crazy left-wing folks, and they're going to take over your golf courses and your houses, and they're going to use them for environmental ends, and your individual rights will be limited because because the state will take them away from you. It's this like big fear of an overreaching government. But in this case, the fear is well founded because at the top of that overreaching government is the Antichrist.
Yeah, there's a lot of other things like built into that too. It's not hard to draw a link between the anti-communism there, right? The Eastern European vibe of Carpathia is like very obviously a kind of communist trope. There's a lot of stuff about how like when people talk about peace, they're actually kind of setting you up to be duped into thinking that what they want is good, but they're just taking advantage of you. It really helps to establish evangelicalism as a conspiracy theory, I think, and to show that like it cannot work unless you're paranoid. Like if you've ever kind of wondered all the time, like why your evangelical aunt is, or probably more likely your evangelical uncle is like constantly concerned about the government. Surely there's lots of political reasons, but also one of them is that like he probably has a biblical hermeneutic that tells him that, the minute somebody like Bernie Sanders or even like Barack Obama is out there talking about like hope and change, like those are all code words for somebody trying to weasel their way into positions of power just to let the devil reign or something like that. So there's like a theological programming at work there that teaches evangelicals to be nervous about governmental authority for theological reasons, and this is that dramatized.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know. It would probably take some more research to make this connection really solid, but I think it's a pretty strong hypothesis, at least, that like A Thief in the Night stuff with the UN, and then like Nicolae Carpathia as left behind Antichrist. Like these are like world leaders, charismatic leaders. I guess like I wouldn't say that Nicolae Carpathia is a left wing leader, but I'm sure that's how he'd be framed.
Yeah.
but like it's totally priming for things like Barack Obama as the Antichrist and stuff like that later, right? Like these are two things these are ideas that are circulating in the same rhetorical spheres that are probably connected. For one's a priming for the other. For the media is a priming for like a real life response to this or something.
Yeah. I mean, evangelicals will even say that about like the Pope or something. Like when Pope Francis talks about taking care of refugees or whatever, they're like, oh yeah, well, the Antichrist also says things about taking care of people. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good segue though into like kind of like the theme, I guess, that you might take away from the movie. I mean, if you were to kind of like read the movie critically or something, I mean, Left Behind is this like story that is so strange because on the one hand, right, the Antichrist and this like tribulation time and inevitably Jesus coming back from the eschaton, these are like determined things. These are determined like like bumps in the road. But at the same time, these people are trying to like participate in history in some way too. Like they're trying to like still witness to other people about Jesus. But it's so weird because like it actually doesn't matter what they do because the same outcome will happen no matter what, right? Like there's one part in this movie where they're like, okay, what are we gonna stop the Antichrist? And they're like, no, you can't stop him. He's here for 7 years.
Right.
And it's like it's this weird sort of like feeling of futility in the movie where I mean, like, I think if you were really to think about it logically, it doesn't actually make any sense. Like, they shouldn't be doing anything at all. They should just be, like, hanging out in church together or whatever. But instead, they go out and try to, like, make this difference, and they like, can't. And in some ways, what they do ends up making things worse, or at least that was the case in the first movie. But the general vibe I get from watching these two movies back to back is that, like, working for peace or trying to change the world is actually impossible because the world is already doomed. And I think that is maybe one of the most important bits of evangelical politics that I think took me a long time to really figure out, that, the world is going to be burnt up anyways. So like, don't try too hard to like fix it. Just try to save people in it. And I think that ends up being really bad as an effect of politics.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that is literally true. Like, I've had evangelical people say that to me in the past. It comes out, especially in the conversation about climate change every once in a while. Like, people will be like, well, even if it's true, Jesus is going to come back anyway, so it doesn't matter how much oil we pull out of the ground, or like what we do to the planet. But it also gets worked out into just social justice stuff, of like, well, one day we're all going to get raptured, so the most important thing you could possibly do is save other people's souls. Which, to be fair, if that's actually what you believe, that's probably true. It's just, wrong and bad. A wrong and bad thing to believe.
Right, because it just lets people suffer.
Right.
I mean, it's so weird. I don't know. It's just weird because, I don't know, evangelicalism is strange because it requires really nothing of you. Except sort of like a belief in a very particular authority. In the movie, like the biggest win they get is when people sort of like they get saved, right? They commit their lives to Jesus, but like materially that means nothing other than like now they're a part of like their social order, and it doesn't mean they do anything differently, right? It doesn't mean they're feeding the hungry. It doesn't mean that they're fighting for the poor or the oppressed or whatever. It just means that they're like going to be in church now.
Yeah,
and it's just really frustrating for that reason too, because it's like you're not gonna try to make the world a better place. You're not gonna try to like work for peace or whatever like the Antichrist is even doing. But you're just gonna like kind of say the magic words and then do nothing.
It's true. Well, there's that side of it, but there's also the other side where you actually expend all your energies on something like going out and saving all these people or pulling them into your social order, and that creates all these other kinds of anxieties and pathologies that make you hyperactive or overactive. I mean, I'm just psychoanalyzing myself, I guess, but
no, I don't disagree. I'm just saying that like I believe that is true, but like evangelicalism is frustrating because it thinks it's doing something, but it's not doing
exactly.
anything.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was also thinking about how many bizarre things come up in terms of like the things that this film forces you to believe about like even your loved ones and stuff. Like, they show all these people who are concerned about like, okay, they show like a guy whose wife and child are raptured away, and then he's left behind, and he's like going to kill himself because he's so sad about it, understandably. And like the way that he kind of gets talked off the ledge essentially is by appealing to that like, don't you want to go see your family again? which is
Right, in heaven.
a pretty wild emotional manipulation. I mean, in the context of the film, it's believable, but in real life, it is awful and horrible. But it also is weird because it presumes that like your wife and child could go to heaven and just be like completely fine with their dad and husband rotting in hell forever. Like that would be a totally okay eternal situation, which is like also just really bizarre.
It is really bizarre. It's really bizarre and really troubling. Well, we don't have a lot of time left. We did spend probably too much time pitching that movie earlier, but that's okay. Do you want to really quickly talk about Israel and Ben Judah as a religious scholar?
Yeah.
It's such a huge part of the movie. You can't avoid Israel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, so the okay, people probably know that like Israel is very important to evangelicals, right? That's a common thing. But one reason that is the case that people might not know is that there's a whole place that Israel and the Jews in particular play, a whole role that they play in the end times eschatology of dispensationalists. So like the last battle has to be fought in a certain place, for example, but also like they have to rebuild the temple in Israel. All these things have to happen before the end times occur. So that's why it's important that evangelicals defend Israel so that they can basically kick off all these events or accelerate them in some way. And they like literally do actually do this, right? They give lots of money to these kinds of projects of like rebuilding the temple, etc. So in this film, Israel occupies a specific place, but also this guy, Rabbi Ben Judah, he throughout the film, he's just referred to as like a famous religious scholar, really brilliant, smart guy. And he's going to make this big announcement on TV and people don't know what it is. But by the time you get to the end, well, maybe I shouldn't reveal it right away, but all that to say, he's set up as this brilliant guy who knows the scriptures inside and out from years of study because he's, a rabbi or whatever. Yeah. Well, okay, I'll do it. I'm just going to go for it. He meets at one point to get convinced. He meets the two witnesses I mentioned at the top of the episode here. So the two witnesses are also in the Bible. In Revelation, there's these two guys, and they can like breathe fire out of their mouths to defend themselves, and they're supposed to like witness to Jesus Christ in the end times. So they're at the wall, they're being like contained by the government, and so Kirk Cameron decides to bring Rabbi Ben Judah to them, and he does, and then they just like spit out a ton of biblical verses about the Messiah at Rabbi Ben Judah and Kirk Cameron, who apparently Rabbi Ben Judah has never heard anything about this, has never once heard Christians talk about why Jesus is the Messiah. And he is utterly convinced, and he makes this big announcement in the end that Jesus Christ is the Messiah that the Jews have been looking for, and the Messiah of the whole world. So that's the supersessionist piece of it too. I know that's most of the plot, but Matt, what really struck you about that in particular?
Yeah, I think just the supersessionism of it all, but also just like it's so funny to think that like this great religious scholar. Wait, people think that Jesus is the Messiah? Really? They think that? Oh, yeah. I guess that fits. I guess that makes sense actually. Now that you say it that way, now it makes sense to me. And then he just like so then the next day or whatever, Rabbi Ben Judah gives this big speech. He's like, listen, Jesus fits all these criteria. Go figure, huh? Evangelical Christians have been saying this since the 1920s. 1920s in the sort of fundamental sense, but for 2,000 years, Christians have been saying that Jesus is actually the Messiah. Like you wouldn't have expected it. I guess no one's ever told me. I don't know. It's so ridiculous. It makes me so mad because so supersessionism is just the basic Christian idea that like Christianity is something that supersedes Judaism, and that like in the end Jews will like recognize that Christ is actually the Messiah or whatever. And that's a idea that has often lent itself to anti-Semitism and a lot of other bad things. But it's just like so frustrating, and it makes me feel so mad that like evangelical filmmakers and writers would just think that this is like, I don't know, this is what they think people would actually respond, or this is how they think the world would actually work, that like all you have to do is just give your stupid pithy reading of the Bible, and these people who are like committing their lives to the study of like the Torah or something would just like then they would just believe it. Like it's so stupid because evangelicals, I mean, they have this belief that like all you need is the Bible, right? It's just you and the text. That's
Right.
the only thing that's important, and that all you have to do is hear it. And like the words of the Bible are so magical that you just have to hear them and then you'll believe. And that's exactly what happens in the movie. And it's so annoying because like no people like like Rabbi Ben Judah is an expert in Judaism. Like he profoundly and seriously believes, you know, the Torah and like the Jewish tradition. Like he believes those things. It's part of his life. And then they just like throw it all away because like some evangelicals have read it in this way. And like, God, it sucks. I'm so mad about it. I'm so mad that they think that that's what other people are like. And I hate it.
Yeah. Well, there's also a weird way that evangelicalism fetishizes Judaism and like really values it insofar as it gives you like the keys to being a good Christian or a true Christian. It creates all these really gross, I don't know, like on the one hand, like being extremely obsessed with Jewish people, and on the other hand, like trying to, you know, suck them into Christianity in some way or another. Yeah. So very bad. Don't do that. Also crazy because, yeah, like you said, like if it was just you and the text, you would never in a million years. I mean, it's like a million monkeys in a room writing on computers could like maybe someday make like a Shakespeare play. That's what dispensationalism feels like. Like you would never read the Bible on your own and ever just intuitively or naively become a dispensationalist. Like
right, it's a hermeneutic project that's been built over, you know, decades of people like, you know, speculating about what these things might mean if the end times were to happen now or something. It's completely weird.
It is.
No, you would never just like magically you just never read a Revelation and magically think this is like what would happen.
Exactly. It's bizarre too because so if you spend time among these folks for a long time, you also learn all the tricks of doing it. So like for example, there's a part there are all these like bad plague type things that happen in Revelation, and evangelicals have all kinds of ways of like modernizing them. So it'll be like something like there are these locusts with human faces and they like sting people and then people can't die and they like want to die. They like throw themselves off of cliffs, but they can't. That's like, you know, it's really gruesome stuff. So if you ask an evangelical, like, what's that? They'll be like, oh yeah, locusts with human face. Like that's a helicopter for sure. And you're like, well, I don't think so, though. But that's the idea, right? It's just like forcing these analogies to like 20th or 21st century societies in these really ham-fisted ways. All right, so we haven't talked about Marxism at all in this episode, and we're probably not going to, but I feel like we should at least do...
It's good still.
It's good. We're still into it. We should maybe end on that note, though, right? That, like, Christian Marxism is good because materialism hopefully stops you from believing in these kinds of extremely bizarre, crappy ways of thinking about both the Bible and the world around you. That's my hot take.
Yeah. It'll also help you see the material implications of these types of theories, like you know, Christian Zionism and stuff.
Well, I think that's going to be the end. I can't do these anymore. I've seen enough of them. I'm done. I'm out of all the. I want to get raptured out of rapture movies for the rest of my life.
I gotta tell you, I'm gonna watch the third movie for sure.
I don't mind maybe playing the video game. I'm gonna try that out maybe. Oh, dang. Here's one thing that I wanted to say at some point, but couldn't figure out a place. So the biggest difference from A Thief in the Night to Left Behind, I think, is we mentioned how A Thief in the Night is like a horror movie earlier, but it also takes place in rural Iowa, whereas Left Behind is a disaster movie, but it takes place always in urban areas, except for when they go to Israel. But it's like Chicago and New York based. And what that means, I'm not exactly sure, except that I think my working hypothesis, this is the note that I'll end on, is as evangelicalism develops, it gets worse and worse and worse by assuming that it has a place in mainstream culture. And maybe it was better when it felt cordoned off to like weird rural horror. Maybe we were all better off back then.
Maybe. That's a good take. Cool. Well, next week we'll come back with some more of that skewed Christian Marxist stuff that you like so much with a new arc, probably. So cool. We'll see you then. But for the meantime, thanks for listening to Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/The Magnificast. You can also follow us on Twitter. We have a Facebook group, etc. It's all great. It's all good. The music in this episode is, as always, by Amari Armstrong. The outro music is by The Illogical Spoon. And I don't know. That's it. We'll see you next week.
Church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon.